All right, good evening. We're back with the Impact of Educational Leadership Talk Show. I'm your host, ID3, along with Professor Jeff Willie. Our panelist tonight is Dr. Candy, Buddy Thornton. And just to start off a little bit here, Professor Jeff Willie served in the United States Air Force for 26 years as combat security fleet instructor, human resource manager, and superintendent of the largest Department of Defense honor guard outside of Washington, D.C. area. After his transition from the Air Force since January 2003, Professor Willie has taught business and humanities classes for the University of Phoenix. Professor Willie is a certified Arkansas State law enforcement instructor and rapid response. Special weapons and tactics. Yes, he's SWAT. Also, he's an honorary colonel of the Arkansas State Police and honorary member of the Arkansas Highway Police Department. He is also a former facilitator of the Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Professor Jeff is an executive director with the John Maxwell team, specializing in personal growth, professional leadership development, with his primary focus on the church leadership and impact of educational leadership. Why? Because everything rises and falls on leadership. Next, we have our panelist, Dr. Buddy Thornton. He is a Vietnam-era veteran who served as a hospital corpsman in the U.S. Navy. He is a certified trainer for the Center for Teacher Effectiveness and certifications in mediation and paralegal studies, with a bachelor's in health science and a master's in health science services and counseling. He is also a certified executive leadership and is currently finishing up his DBA at Grand Canyon University. Buddy has owned multiple successful logistics businesses before his shift to current roles, and currently the owner of BCT Mediations Plus, a mediations and coaching consultation firm that specializes in executive coaching, employee peer mediation coaching, and partnership conflict. He is a principal keynote speaker in conflict management, parenting dynamics, cross-cultural topics, and family development seminars and workshops where he initiates and he oversees. He has developed an impactful series of 5 parenting seminars and workshops and is currently working to have an online curriculum for this series. Gentlemen, please say hello to the people.
Well, let me say hello to the people, but I also want to say to Buddy, as a Vietnam-era vet, I always want to acknowledge the fact, welcome home, sir. Welcome home. Yes, I always, my brother is 2 times tours in Vietnam, and I make it a personal, intentional impact to be able to connect with Vietnam-era veterans and say, welcome home, gentlemen. We didn't receive you well, but it's time to say, welcome home. I embrace what you men and women did in that era. So welcome home, and it's good to be part of this podcast with Buddy and with Isaiah. Thank you for continuing to host this, and I'm looking forward to an exciting evening.
Professor Willie and ID3, I concur. I believe that the fellowship that we were able to join into here is not only a bond from our past military experience, but our commitment to serve others honorably from a position of servant leadership. And that's our mission in life, and I feel honored that you were allowed me to be part of this trio.
Absolutely. What our topic this evening is why leaders need cultural experience. Developing cultural knowledge begins by understanding its possibilities. It's vital to recognize that everyone has ways of functioning in the world that are a direct result of their upbringing. unless you spend time absorbed in other cultures, it's difficult to see your own cultural norms, but they exist and others notice. Developing cultural know-how begins by understanding that working with these differences rather than resisting them can unlock limitless possibilities for future relationships. It's required being humble enough to identify the need for understanding and diplomacy. Some people are naturally gifted with cultural competence because they've lived in rich areas, rich environments, and have had the experience of a rich life, immersed in other cultures through traveling and other adventures. Traveling, even for a vacation, is one way to develop cultural competence. You'll learn to jump in with the locals and do as they do. If traveling doesn't interest you, you can learn about other cultures online. Though it's not the same, one thing to remember is that developing and practicing cultural competence isn't about using strategies on other people. It's about your way of being. If you don't understand someone, well, being willing to suspend your judgments and simply ask questions will be more than effective than using strategies that you have learned from different models, or what some of the researchers are saying. Professor Willie, I want to engage you first, if that's okay.
Yes, sir. Go for it. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Professor Willie, what are some ways that the impact of educational leadership can positively develop cultural competency?
What a phenomenal question. I want to first by starting off by giving a definition of somewhat of a quantitative definition of cultural competence. And I think it fits the bill for no matter what, if it's educational or it's business or what area. And then I want to share a small story about my own cultural experiences, and then I'll try to wrap it up on this question with some things that campus administrators or educational leaders can do to enhance that cultural competency in that classroom and on that campus. But cultural competence is, as you stated, Isaiah, is just having an awareness of my own culture. I need to identify what are some of my implicit bias, unconscious bias, and things that have affected me, that identified my views, and then open myself up about the differences and the ability of others, and learn to build on that, what I call variety of culture and that community of norms about students and about life and about family. I know we're talking about education, and I'll get there in a minute, but it's becoming aware of my own culture and what are some of the things that's impacting my decisions based on my culture, impacting my views based on my culture, and how do I relate to others that are different from me based on my culture. That level of awareness, once I attune to that level of awareness and accept those differences as an educator, to be able to establish that cultural competent classroom, because I am going to make myself available to learn those norms and those students and those families that I have in my classroom. Those are very students that come from different and cultural backgrounds. And this understanding of that informs me and expands my teaching practices, and certainly what it calls end up being a cultural competent educator's classroom. Now let me bring that back into a personal story and a personal awareness of shaping a worldview, and then I'll close it with some things I believe that campus administrators can enhance the capability of cultural competence on that campus. And just a very quick story of my background growing up in rural East Texas, and not and basically fenced in that environment, closed in that environment. That environment still exists today when I go back to East Texas, because many folks have not ventured out of that environment, understand the diversity and the beauty of being exposed to different culture. As you said, Isaiah, travel exposes you to that. And some cultures have the abilities, and some races and economic situations have the ability to travel and see the world, so they're a little bit more cultural or competent than others. But one thing that helped me is that when I joined the military, one of my first assignments coming out of rural East Texas was being based in Germany. And that was an eye-opener, an epiphany, and a paradigm shift, and realizing that the world is beautiful. And then coming back to the States and having that European awareness and traveling around Europe and realize that and understanding some of their norms and their difference from me, and they embrace me and I embrace them. And then secondly, when I got a chance to travel to the Middle East and to travel throughout Egypt and Kuwait and Oman and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and those different locations in the Middle East, and being able to embrace that hospitality and the differences of those cultures, those things expanded my knowledge and appreciate those cultures, and in turn learned they appreciated me as well. While I expanded that knowledge, that gave me a global perspective that shaped my worldview. And one of the things that came out of that worldview is when I basically went back to school as an adult learner, and one of the things I had to do, beginning my bachelor's degree, my final assignment was, what is my worldview? And if I'd have stayed in rural East Texas and stayed in that view, in that culture, my worldview would have been limited. It would have been limited to what I saw in the news. It would have been limited to what I saw in the classroom. It would have been limited to that environment and not having access to the worldview that I was exposed to by traveling throughout the military, and then also traveling on vacation to different parts of the globe. Now, this is what organization, this is what a campus culture is established through the leadership. I've always believe everything rises and falls on leadership, so that campus administrator has got to be intentional about establishing and appreciation that diversity and establishing a cultural competent campus.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Professor Willie, because yes, I was just about to mention about the campus administrators, right, and the awareness that you so eloquently mentioned, but how it relates to the people. Because the gap, the achievement gap, is how do we relate to the people? And so, Dr. Buddy Thornton, let me ask you this next question, because I think you can help us kind of bring a bridge to this based off of your experience as well, by giving us a different perspective. So my question for you is, what is cultural competency to you?
One of the biggest things is what Professor Willie hit on very rapidly, is a level of self-awareness that not only do you have strengths and weaknesses based on your own upbringing and your own culture, but if you must extend that awareness to that, if that's the truth for you, that has to be the truth in all cultures. You can't have a cultural competency without having a strong self-awareness, because as Professor Willie mentioned, you do have built-in biases. You have biases that control two very strong paradigms. One is the primes that you get from the time you're born until you actually get to explore, expand your curiosity outside of your home environment. Once you start traveling or you start meeting other people from other cultures, very rapidly the primes that were embedded in you as a child and as a youth and then as a teenager all come to the forefront, and they drive your biases. And things that other people do in other cultures become triggers, and those primes can be very powerful, and they can create either a positive emotion about, wow, this is really fantastic, or, oh my gosh, I can't understand this and I don't want to deal with this. And so cultural competency starts always by defining your own biases and creating a way to get beyond those biases. You have to create an attitude of everyone has value. Everyone has value regardless of where they are from, who they are. And then you combine that with the cognition that you gain through the knowledge that you acquire, either through travel or education or simply sticking your nose into books or going online and doing research about other people and other things. You have to feed your curiosity and develop skills of how to first bring people in and accept them for who they are, what they are, why they do what they do. This is the basis of cultural competency. In the beginning, a lot of academians thought, well, you know, cultural competency extends out of cultural intelligence. Well, okay, so multinational corporations in the 80s and 90s would feed all their people who were going overseas with information about what is the native culture, what is the indigenous population like. And what they did was they reinforced stereotypes, which created a problem. And then the people like myself and the pioneers in our field started saying, you know, we need more than just cultural intelligence. We need to understand that regardless of what the stereotype is in an environment, every person in that environment does not fit that stereotype. We need to go deeper. We need to get on a very, very strict one-on-one basis and say, hey, I need to know more about this person, not more about this society. And so cultural competency to me is being able to get beyond the stereotype and getting down to exactly what one person in one environment does, says, and how they impact you and how you impact them. And that leads to very, very strong cultural competency.
I just wanted you just absolutely just impressed me with that level of information about what we did as even as military folks in global or international organizations, that cultural education and what created, I wrote that down, what created those level of, enhanced those stereotypes. Instead of us diving deep and connecting with folks as who they are and connecting with them based on their values and their norms and their upbringing, I like what you said, buddy, that if that truth is about your culture, that truth must be about every culture. That is so significant, and so that was absolutely amazing the way you articulate that, because that was an epiphany for me. If that is true about my culture, is truth about every culture, and we must get beyond, identify our unconscious bias, our implicit bias, those subconscious issues that resonates in us, and we need to recognize those. Once we recognize those and become aware of those, because that is the beginning of learning.
That is correct. One of the most important things that people lose sight of is that we have to be able to walk the talk. And in today's very, very divisive society, the way things appear to be on the surface, probably because of the way the media portrays things, that becomes a large out-group mentality. It creates an out-group mentality, and what cultural competency does is it expands your in-group. It allows you to suspend those barriers and extend your in-group to people that otherwise would never even be considered as part of your in-group. And once you bring them in, you start to be more comfortable with people who are different, and then you realize, oh my goodness, you know what? Humans are 95% the same, regardless of their affectations. We're all the same. And the more you expand that in-group, that's what becomes rapidly apparent. And you learn to embrace that, or you fall to the wayside. That's cultural competency.
And it is. And you know, let me ask you a question, because I want to ask Professor Willie another question, but let me ask you another question since you said that, because you talked about exploring, you talked about explaining different cultures' curiosity. And so what is this saying to you, though? What is this saying to you?
Curiosity has to be an open book. The biggest barrier that we have, as Professor Sully called it, an implicit bias. The largest barrier we have is we've already made up our mind. We're not willing to be curious about other people from other places and other cultures, and even intraculturally. Here within the United States, we don't want to be curious about other people. So you have to be willing to suspend your biases to actually become more curious. And once you become more curious, you find that you can no longer judge. Judging is locked into your implicit biases. Being non-judgmental is expanded by feeding your curiosity like a ravenous beast. You got to make sure you feed it all the time and never fail to be curious.
That what Buddy just said is the level of curiosity. I got to have a desire to know you. If I want to know you, I'm going to ask you questions about you, and I'm going to respect you. If your opinion is different from mine, your culture is different from mine, and I appreciate that diversity, I appreciate those differences. Once I understand you, I get to connect with you, and I want to build a relationship with you. That level of curiosity that has to be an open book. That has to be part of your DNA, part of your thought process. And the only way, you can't just be judgmental, and you cannot be just forming thoughts without asking questions. When you see something different, let me give you an example. I spent some time in the Muslim world and then Middle East, and one of the things, I was in Atlanta, and I was watching the young man from, I want to say he was, I'm not sure exactly, but I just saw him in the bathroom, and just a quick example, and I always wondered, why do the men of the Muslim faith throughout the day, they go in the restroom and they wash their face? And so, we tend not to do that as traditional Americans, wash our face after we finish using the restroom. And so I just thought to ask the gentleman a question. He's just a part of my faith. He said, and then when he looked at me, he said, I appreciate you stopping and taking the time and asking me that question. And from that day forward, he and I was very, very connected. He was a maitre d' at the hotel there in Atlanta, downtown Atlanta. And just the fact I asked the question, being curious about him, wanted to know more about him, connected us together. And he was just so polite, so kind, and so respectful. That creates that bridge. That bridge is curiosity. I want to know you. I can't know you by reading things in the book. I may get initial information about you, but I need to know you by talking to you and asking questions about you and the different nuances and the things you do. And that is a bridge to relationships. Those barriers are removed based on the level of curiosity. Buddy, I appreciate you actually adding that word to this discussion, curiosity. And you've heard this cliche before. And this is a very, very negative cliche, but curiosity killed the cat. I suppose as a child, but no, curiosity what saves your life.
Amen. That is absolutely true. When I run into any type of a situation where I see people closing off their minds, the first question I ask is, where would you like to open up your curiosity? What would you like to do? If you could just ask one question of another person, how would that embrace your ability to embrace that person? Because as long as you have no curiosity, you are never going to ask the question, and you are never going to know. And that creates, in my heart at least, that creates a level of sadness that is hard to overcome.
Yes, I totally agree. A level of sadness, and you never connect with people. This world is absolutely beautiful, and I'm so thankful I had the opportunity to remove myself from my culturally biased environment that I grew up in rural East Texas, and then get away and see the world, and expose me to diversity and level of cultural competence. And I was able to pass it on to my children and my grandson, and having a diverse environment. So this is a very, 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 very rich discussion. And I appreciate you bringing it to the forefront, Isaiah.
Well, I'm here to serve, and with that being said, since we got you two gentlemen here with us, I want to take advantage of every opportunity that we have in this moment. And so, let me ask you this question, Professor Jeff Willie.
Okay.
How do you develop? Are we talking about, I know originally in the commentary I was talking about, people try to make it scientific, try to put a model behind it with or the steps or, a process. But, we do need to have some type of roadmap. So how do you develop cultural competency to meet your business goals? And I know you have a lot of different business endeavors that you do, and it's very successful. So do you, Dr. Thornton. But so how do you develop? How do you make it work?
Well, it goes back to our initial foundation. You make it work by being aware and being respectful and understand who you are. And as Buddy and I talked about earlier, is that you got to know what triggers you, positive or negative, and how you respond based on your own cultural implicit bias and your cultural background and how you respond to different things and how do you see the world. And, of course, creating that level of awareness is significantly important. But I want to go with this right here in regards to what business leaders must focus on to develop that cultural competence within their business, because right now business is global. And no matter who you are, where you work, business is global. And you're dealing with diverse and different cultures from all over the globe. No matter what you do, if you're buying something at Walmart, it has a global entity to it, it has a global piece. And these are some of the things that are predictable outcomes, I believe, are significantly important when you're creating that cultural competence, because we want outcomes. We want to be able to create that a level of awareness, and these are some things that you got to be aware of, and you want outcomes in order to grow your business. One thing we know that cultural competence, as we just talked about with that gentleman I'm asking about washing his face in the bathroom, and that creates rapport. That cultural competence created that rapport with that gentleman in the restroom that day. And now we have a connection. That cultural competence in a global perspective, because of rapport, working relationships is increased significantly, and so it improves efficiency. Efficiency because of those working relationships. Cultural competence opens up by me being aware of those cultural competence of different diverse environments. It enhances my travel, opens up new markets and new networks. I spend time in Africa. I'm preparing to go to Japan in November, and those doors, those networks are open because I'm respectful of those environments. And we say things to our young men in this country and our young women in this country. When you're talking to someone, look them in the eye. Well, that's not for every culture, is it? And we both know that. And I've been in the Middle East, and when we go to the Far East, that is something you don't do. That's considered offensive and that's considered hostile when you look in, especially the seniors, in the eye. So you got to be aware of that. And so those are the things that build those markets and networks open up. Cultural competence makes people feel valued, and it builds loyalty. And so when people are valued and they felt a sense of loyalty, guess what happens out of that? Repeat businesses, repeat opportunities. Your business grows because people feel valued. Cultural competence creates innovation. If I'm aware and I'm working with, I use this analogy, and take this 1 + 1 = 3. That's a mathematical equation. 1 + 1 = 2. I know when you're dealing with the math equation, it's 1 + 1 = 2. But when you're dealing with relationships and conflict management and cultural competence, 1 + 1 = 3. Because it takes the best of my world, and I take the best of someone that's different from me in their world, and then we come up with a third alternative to be able to be innovative and creative, which is a third alternative, because now that person has valued my differences, and I'm in value their differences, and we take the best of our differences, and that becomes a third alternative, and that creates a level of innovation and creativity. And one thing about cultural competence, it helps you avoid mistakes and miscommunications and dissatisfaction. Because if you become cultural competent, yes, you will make some mistakes periodically, but your level of curiosity, you won't repeat those mistakes when you're dealing with diverse individuals and diverse cultures and diverse backgrounds, because your sense of learning, your learning curve grows significantly and exponentially. And that's the focus of that. And if you have an organization, a company, I like what Buddy just talked about a few minutes ago, the diversity he has in his organization. That means a lot. That means a lot. That level of diversity, that innovation, that creativity, that efficiency, and men and women are valued based on recognizing and appreciate culture, growing and understanding culture competence and aware of culture competence and accepting it and appreciating it and respecting it and embracing it in every area.
Americans are quick to the draw. They jump to business. They don't look at the world through the same lens that people from other cultures look at the world. When you're dealing with people in Southeast Asia, or you're dealing even with people from Mexico or South America, the first thing on their plate is developing a relationship. They don't want to develop business if they can't have a solid relationship behind that business. Americans do it the other way around. They think that if they provide good business and they jump into good business, that the relationships will follow. And we have it backwards. We have flipped the plate, and our plate means our food is all on the floor, where in other cultures, they understand relationships drive business, not the other way around. Business does not drive relationships.
Yes, sir. Can I share a personal story? I'm very transparent, and Isaiah knows I'm very transparent. I like to use myself in my classroom, use myself in my speaking engagements, and being very transparent. My first trip to the Middle East, not my first trip, my second trip on a long-term basis, Muscat, Oman, and I'm working with the Omani Air Force. They're part of our partnership with the Omani Air Force. Me and my commander at the time, we hosted the Omani Air Force at a 10 o'clock meeting to go over some security issues for the Yasib International Airport. And so we are hosting them, and obviously one thing that we are very conscious in American is the time. At 10 o'clock, we expect to start a meeting at 10 o'clock. Well, 10 o'clock rolls around, no one's there. 10:30 rolls around, the Omani Air Force members still haven't arrived. But we have already made the mistake at the beginning, because what we didn't have pastries, we didn't have coffee, we didn't have tea, we didn't have fruit and food available for those men and women. It was primarily men when they showed up. And now they showed up around about around 11:15, and because you got to understand hot culture versus cold culture. If you understand that essence of time, that's another culture component you need to be aware of as well. Hot culture versus cold culture. Cold cultures is more time sensitive. Hot cultures are not time sensitive. Travel to Africa and travel to some hot climates, and you'll see most of them we didn't wear a tie. And so that was a learning curve for me as well. And then, as you stated, buddy, the first thing we wanted to do was jump right into the meeting. And they wanted to do what? Talk about family, talk about relationships, and how's our children, how's our wives, and what are we doing, and what do we grow up? And that was a learning curve for me. That was an epiphany for me. And from that day forward, because I was curious about that, we never made that mistake again.
Buddy, let me ask you a question. How do you, Dr. Thornton, let me ask you a question. How do you engage with conflict management in an organization?
The most important thing that you do when you're faced with a conflict is not focus on the conflict. What you have to first do is you have to get down to the one-on-one dyadic relationship between the parties and understand the root cause of the conflict. The conflict is immaterial. It could be any type of conflict. But if you don't understand the background and the culture and the meaning that people take, the perspective taking that they have when they look at the conflict, you can have two people who are looking at the same conflict, and one has a completely different perspective of the conflict than the other. And if you haven't taken your time as a professional to understand how each one of them views the world, you have to understand their worldview, you have no hope of engaging in solving the conflict. Let me give you one example, a very strong example. At one of the engineering firms here in the Phoenix metro area, there were two people. One was from Pakistan and one was from India. As with the Israeli-Arab conflict, this is a conflict between peoples that has been going on for several thousand years. This is not a new conflict. We're pretty young here in America. We've only been around 200 plus years. They've been around for thousands of years. So these two people were faced with needing to work with each other in a department, and yet culturally they were completely diametrically opposed to each other. And so there was an underlying conflict of, well, you know, we have a job to do, but I don't want to work with him, and and I don't want to work with him. And the way we bridge that is an individual meeting with each one to just explore their culture, get them comfortable, tell them a little bit about who they are, what they believe. And then, lo and behold, when the two parties were brought together, the question that was put on the table is, how do we not understand that we are not only somewhat different, but we're different for reasons that has nothing to do with either one of you. You're a dyad. This is one-on-one. You have never done anything to offend each other. So let's break the ice. Tell each other one thing about your world. just one thing that they may not have a commonality with it, or they will have a commonality with it. And lo and behold, once they got to talking, they understood that even though their cultures had been opposed to each other for thousands of years, they were almost identical. They could have almost been twin brothers. And so within 3 months, they were working not only as collaborative partners in the department, but the partnership was thriving. The department was thriving because they had put aside exactly what we were talking about. They had put aside their biases. They understood why they felt the way they did. It had nothing to do with them personally. It was embedded culturally. And they were able to take it out, put it on the shelf, and understand each other from a very dyadic personal relationship, and it thrived. And that's why curiosity is so important.
And what he just said, it thrives and it created innovation. That's just absolutely when you understand that. Well said, buddy. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate what you're bringing to the table tonight. That's absolutely amazing. So thank you so much. I have learned a lot. I've been a student of listening and a student of learning.
Well, gentlemen, we have learned a lot from both of you guys, and unfortunately, we're out of time. And so, buddy, we'll have to bring you back, okay? And so, with that being said, guys, give us a takeaway from tonight's discussion. Who wants to go first?
Be willing to take a pilgrimage with people that you have never met before.
My focus in the education side, totally agree. Passport, a library card, and access to the internet will open up your perspective and open up your world. Travel, make sure you use that passport. And then for educators, you can get out of your norm, step out of your norm, ask questions, and stay hungry and stay curious.
All right. Well, this was another exciting evening with the Impact of Education Leadership Talk Show. I'm your host, ID3, and along with the Honorable Professor Jeff Willie. Goodbye for now.